The weeks following the near collapse of Leon Hartmann's empire were some of the most intense of his life, because while the deal he almost lost had been delayed, investigations, legal reviews, and the silent but relentless pressure of competitors, media, and investors meant that every day was a test of patience, courage, and resilience. And yet through all of it, one constant remained. Nina Fischer, the young woman who had risked everything to save him, whose courage had exposed lies, traps, and hidden dangers in contracts that even the most experienced lawyers had overlooked, and whose presence had slowly but irreversibly changed Leon's life because he had discovered in her honesty, loyalty, and quiet strength a clarity that no money, power, or luxury had ever given him. And he realized that all the boardrooms, all the billion-dollar meetings, and all the accolades he had received in his life could never replace the feeling of standing beside someone who truly saw him, understood him, and had chosen to risk herself for him without expecting anything in return. And while Leon struggled with the weight of his responsibilities, he also found himself thinking of her constantly, wondering how she slept, whether she was safe, whether she had eaten, and whether the small moments they had shared, the quiet smiles across a crowded office, the soft laughter after a long day, the brief, accidental touch of hands while passing documents meant as much to her as they did to him. And he realized, painfully and beautifully, that the connection between them had grown into something far beyond gratitude or respect, had become love, tender, patient, and profound. And yet, as much as Leon wanted to express it, he knew the world they inhabited was dangerous, full of people who would exploit weakness, mock vulnerability, and manipulate affection for their own gain. And he feared that expressing his feelings too openly could put Nina in harm's way. And so he kept his emotions carefully guarded, showing care through small gestures, arranging medical care for her mother, ensuring her safety during public appearances, sending quiet gifts without fanfare, standing by her decisions, and respecting her independence. And Nina, for her part, felt the stirrings of love too, though she struggled to admit it to herself, because a billionaire and a poor waitress were from two worlds that were never meant to intersect. Yet the nights they had spent together reviewing contracts, the quiet moments of laughter, and the shared fear of danger had forged a bond stronger than any social divide. And she realized, with a mixture of awe and terror, that she was falling for him, and as that realization settled in her chest, it brought with it a storm of doubts about their future, about what people would say, about how such a love could survive in a world where power and money always threatened two separate hearts. Yet, even with fear swirling around her, Nina found courage in knowing that Leon did not see her as a liability, as a tool, or as someone to protect from afar, but as a partner, a person worthy of respect, whose voice mattered, whose opinions shaped decisions, and whose presence gave him clarity. And that acknowledgement made her feel a warmth that had nothing to do with comfort, but everything to do with love. And the first time, Leon looked at her with something beyond gratitude, beyond respect. It was during a tense boardroom confrontation, where powerful investors tried to pressure him into accepting a risky shortcut, and as tensions rose and voices grew sharp, Nina quietly leaned over a stack of documents and explained a critical clause in simple, precise terms that exposed a flaw in their strategy. And in that instant, Leon's gaze met hers across the table, and he saw something that neither numbers nor contracts could convey: intelligence and a quiet defiance that made him catch his breath. Because she was not just saving his empire again, she was saving him from a life where money alone ruled his decisions. And after the meeting, in the private hallway outside the boardroom, Leon said her name softly, almost reverently, and told her that, without her, he would not have known how close he had been to losing everything. And Nina, cheeks flushing, felt something stir inside her that she could not name yet, because she had spent her life helping others survive, but never had anyone looked at her like this, with awe, respect, and gratitude so deep it seemed to fill the room. And as the weeks turned into months, their connection deepened, carried in quiet moments, in the subtle touch of hands, while passing papers, in shared glances across conference tables, in laughter that broke the tension after long days of legal battles. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, fear gave way to trust, trust to admiration, and admiration to something neither of them could deny any longer, a love that had grown in the most unlikely place, forged in danger, honesty, and courage. And one rainy evening, after the city had gone quiet, Leon asked Nina to meet him at the same small cafe where it had all begun. And as she arrived, umbrella in hand, she saw him waiting, coat slightly wet from the rain, eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. And for a long moment, neither spoke, because the rain, the memories of fear and triumph, and the weight of everything they had endured hung between them. And then Leon took a careful step forward, hands slightly trembling, and said, in a voice both strong and vulnerable, that this night, this moment, was not about contracts, deadlines, or battles, but about honesty, truth, and what he could no longer ignore his feelings for her, the way she had become part of his life, part of his heart, and part of his soul. And Nina, stunned and breathless, felt tears prick her eyes, because she had spent her life defending herself, hiding behind courage and independence, yet here was a man, powerful beyond measure, admitting his vulnerability, trusting her completely with his heart, and as she stood there, rain falling softly around them, she realized she felt the same, that fear, pride, and societal divides could not stop what had grown between them. And in that charged moment, Leon stepped closer, gently taking her hand, and Nina, feeling warmth, security, and love unlike anything she had ever known, let herself hold on, realizing that the world outside could rage, enemies could threaten, and obstacles could rise. But in that instant, they were alone, connected by truth, courage, and a love that had been tested in the fire of danger and hardship. And as Leon spoke again, his voice low and steady, he promised that no matter the threats, no matter the power of his rivals, he would always protect her. Not as a rich man controlling a poor woman, but as a partner, as someone who loved her, respected her, and needed her in his life. And Nina, hearing the sincerity in his words, felt a courage blossom in her chest, because she realized that love, real love, was not about wealth, status, or comfort, but about honesty, trust, and standing together in the face of adversity. And when Leon finally leaned forward, their foreheads touching, rain still falling softly around them, it was not just a kiss that passed between them, but the culmination of months of fear, tension, trust, and growing affection. And as they pulled back, eyes locked, hearts pounding, they understood that nothing would ever be the same. Because their love had been born in danger, tempered in courage, and tested by truth, and now it was unstoppable, fierce, and real. And as burning lights glimmered through the rain, they both knew that while enemies still lurked, contracts still loomed, and challenges remained, they would face the world together, not as billionaire and waitress, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had chosen each other, whose love had survived the impossible, and whose bond now promised not only a future together, but a life built on honesty, courage, and a language that neither contracts nor money could ever define, the language of love. After the storm of the contract and the night of danger, Leon Hartmann and Nina Fischer found themselves in a world that was calmer on the surface, but still full of tension beneath, because the enemies who had tried to trick Leon had not disappeared, and the media still whispered about delays, mistakes, and a mysterious assistant who helped him. And while Leon worked tirelessly to protect both his company and Nina, Hira realized something new, something he had never expected. He could not stop thinking about her. The young woman who had risked everything for him, who had faced fear with courage, and whose honesty had saved not only his empire, but also his life. And at first, Leon tried to ignore these feelings, reminding himself that she was a poor waitress, that their worlds were separate, that even acknowledging affection could bring disaster. Yet every time he saw her laugh quietly, every time she explained a clause with a careful smile, his chest tightened, and he realized that he had begun to care in ways money could never buy. And Nina, too, noticed the changes in herself, because as days passed and they met in offices and quiet cafes to prepare for legal challenges, she found that she looked for Leon's presence, that his words and glances carried a warmth she did not expect. And even though she reminded herself constantly that he was a billionaire, that their lives were worlds apart, she could not deny the connection forming, a bond forged in danger and honesty. And yet this bond came with pain, because the world refused to make it easy. Media headlines mocked her. Social media whispered rumors about a billionaire's favorite assistant, and coworkers and friends warned her about getting too close. And she wondered if being honest and brave was worth inviting attention and danger. Yet every time Leon's hand brushed hers while passing a document, every time he paused to make sure she understood the risks, her heart betrayed her, and she felt something tender and raw growing between them. And Leon noticed, too, because he realized that saving a life had brought him something he never expected. A sense of belonging, a feeling that someone truly saw him. Beyond the empire, beyond the money, and as one quiet evening approached, with rain tapping softly on the windows of a small office where they worked together, Leon finally spoke, hesitating, because words were dangerous, because emotions in his world were often twisted, but he looked at Nina and said plainly that he had never met anyone like her, that her courage, her honesty, her strength and kindness had changed him more than any success ever could. And Nina, surprised, looked down briefly, her fingers fidgeting with a pen, and admitted softly that she had not expected to feel anything beyond responsibility for helping him. Yet, she could not deny that he had grown important in her thoughts, that his presence gave her comfort and, strangely, excitement. And in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them, fragile but real. And though neither spoke the words, "I love you," yet, the air was charged with a new energy, a dangerous tenderness, because acknowledging it could make them vulnerable. And outside the office, storms of pressure continued. Investors were impatient, rivals were planning revenge, and even Leon's own board questioned his choices. But inside that small room, all that mattered was trust, safety, and the unspoken connection that had grown between a billionaire and a poor waitress. And as days passed, Leon found excuses to stay near Nina, to watch her work, to listen when she spoke, offering small gestures of kindness, helping her with her mother's medical bills quietly, sending small gifts, all without ostentation, because he wanted her to feel safe, not indebted. And Nina, in turn, started trusting him more than she expected, telling him things she had never shared with anyone, about her childhood, about fears of failure, about small dreams she had abandoned for survival. And Leon listened, not interrupting, not judging, only letting her words sink in. And in the spaces between discussions of contracts, deadlines, and strategies, moments of laughter began to appear, small smiles, glances that lingered just a second too long, hands brushing as they exchanged documents, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, love began to take root, tender, cautious, yet impossible to ignore. And then came a turning point, a day when a major investor tried to corner Leon into a rash decision, and Nina stepped in quietly, offering a calm explanation, her voice steady, her logic undeniable. And Leon watched her, all mixing with pride, because this young woman, who had once been invisible in the eyes of the world, was now standing firmly beside him, not as a servant or assistant, but as a partner in thought. And when the investor finally relented, Leon caught Nina's eye, and in that fleeting moment, he realized he could not imagine facing any challenge without her. And Nina, noticing his gaze, felt her heart pound, because she had never thought a billionaire could notice her in this way. Yet here he was, seeing her, truly seeing her. And in the weeks that followed, they shared small, stolen moments, a coffee break in silence, a quiet walk after reviewing contracts, a brief touch on the arm to emphasize a point. And each time, their connection deepened, growing into something neither dared name, because naming it meant admitting vulnerability. And in their world, vulnerability was dangerous, yet also irresistible. And slowly, they began to understand that love could exist even in the shadows of danger, that it could bloom quietly amidst fear, pressure, and difference. And one evening, as they walked together through a quiet Berlin street, rain falling softly around them, Leon stopped, turning to face Nina, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her catch her breath. And he said simply that no matter what the world demanded, he would not let her face it alone, that she had become too important to him, not because of what she had done, but because of who she was. And Nina, heart pounding, felt tears pricked at the corner of her eyes, because for the first time, someone powerful was offering her more than money or protection. He was offering trust, respect, and something far more valuable, his heart. And though the storm outside still raged, both of them realized that love had quietly grown, unstoppable, now fragile but fierce. And while enemies watched, deadlines loomed, and danger remained just beyond the door, Leon Hartmann and Nina Fischer finally understood that what had begun as courage and truth had blossomed into something deeper, something worth fighting for, a love born in risk, tempered in fear, and ready to face whatever the world dared to throw at them next. The morning after the night that changed everything did not bring peace to Nina Fischer or Leon Hartmann, because truth, once exposed, never rests quietly. And as the sun climbed higher over Berlin, Leon's decision to delay the signing began to echo through boardrooms, offices, and private calls filled with controlled anger and polite threats, while Nina, sitting alone in her small apartment, felt an unease she could not explain, a sense that the world outside her thin walls had shifted, because when she checked her phone, she saw missed calls from the restaurant manager and unread messages that made her stomach tighten, and she knew without opening them that her job was gone. Yet what hurt more was not the loss of work, but the fear of what might come next, because powerful people rarely forgave those who ruined their plans. And while Nina tried to calm herself by preparing tea for her mother, who slept quietly in the next room, unaware of the storm forming around them, Leon was already facing the consequences of his choice, sitting in a sleek conference room surrounded by men who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, men who spoke of misunderstandings and unnecessary delays, while Leon calmly insisted on transparency and full review. And as Nina had predicted, his refusal to move quickly made them nervous, their voices sharper, their patience thinner, and one by one, they attempted to pressure him, reminding him of deadlines, investments, and public expectations. But Leon did not bend, because every word Nina had translated still echoed in his mind, reminding him that silence would cost him far more than resistance. And as the meeting ended with no agreement, Leon knew he had just made powerful enemies, yet instead of fear, he felt a strange clarity, because for the first time, he had chosen truth over comfort, and that choice gave him strength. Even as danger grew, and across the city, Nina finally answered, her phone listening quietly as the manager spoke harshly, accusing her of breaking rules and embarrassing the restaurant. And before she could defend herself, he told her not to come back, ending the call without goodbye. And Nina sat there in silence, staring at the wall. Because although she had expected this, the finality still hurt. And as she looked at her mother, who depended on her income, fear washed over her again. Because doing the right thing had a price, and she was paying it alone. Or so she thought, because moments later, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number asking her to meet, and Nina's heart raced, unsure if this was help or another threat, and she hesitated, remembering Leon's words about powerful eyes watching her, and after a long moment, she decided not to go, choosing safety over curiosity. And that choice may have saved her, because across town, Leon was receiving similar messages, subtle warnings wrapped in polite language, reminding him that partnerships required trust and cooperation. And as the day wore on, media rumors began to surface, whispers of a delayed deal, questions about Leon Hartmann's judgment, and by evening, articles appeared suggesting that Leon was unstable, overly cautious, even afraid. And Nina saw one such article while scrolling through her phone, recognizing Leon's name immediately, and guilt tightened her chest, because she wondered if helping him had made his life worse. And yet she knew that silence would have destroyed him completely. And as night fell again, Nina heard a knock at her door, sharp and unexpected, and her heart jumped, because she was not expecting anyone, and when she opened it carefully, she saw two men in dark coats standing outside, their expressions polite but cold, asking if she was Nina Fischer. And although they did not raise their voices, the question itself felt like a threat. And Nina's mind raced, thinking of her mother behind her, and she answered carefully, asking what they wanted. And they replied that they were asking questions related to a business matter and that it would be better if she cooperated, and fear flooded her chest, because she understood instantly that this was about Leon, and without thinking, she told them she knew nothing more than what she had already said. And after a long pause, one of the men smiled slightly, warning her that silence had consequences too, before turning and leaving. And Nina locked the door with shaking hands, realizing that the danger had finally reached her world. And at that exact moment, as if fate itself connected them, Leon called her, his voice tight with concern, asking if she was safe, because he had just learned that people connected to the deal were asking about her. And Nina hesitated before answering honestly, telling him what had just happened. And Leon's jaw tightened on the other end of the line, anger and responsibility mixing inside him, because this was exactly what he had feared. And he told her, firmly, that she was not alone, that he would arrange protection and legal support. And although Nina wanted to refuse, pride fighting fear, she finally agreed, understanding that this was no longer just her fight. And as the call ended, Nina sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, tears filling her eyes, because she wondered if love, truth, and honesty were always punished before they were rewarded. And across the city, Leon stood by his window, looking out at the lights of Berlin, realizing that exposing the truth had cost Nina her job, her peace, and now her safety. And that knowledge hardened his resolve, because whatever this battle demanded, he would not allow Nina Fischer to be its victim. And as the night deepened, both of them understood that the story was no longer about a contract or a deadline, but about the price of standing up to power, a price that had to be paid before anything good could begin. And somewhere in the shadows, the people who had set the trap realized it had failed. And that realization made them dangerous, because when truth survives its first test, those who fear it strike harder, setting the stage for a confrontation that would decide not only the future of Leon Hartmann's empire, but the fate of the poor waitress who dared to speak the truth. The day continued to move forward. But for Nina Fischer, it felt like time had slowed into something heavy and painful, because every sound outside her small apartment now felt like a warning, every ring of her phone like a threat. And as she sat beside her mother, pretending calm while her thoughts raced, she realized how fragile her life truly was. Because one honest decision had taken away her job, her safety, and the quiet routine she depended on. And yet, when she looked at her mother's tired face, she knew she would make the same choice again, even if fear wrapped tightly around her chest. Because some lines could not be crossed back once stepped over. And while Nina tried to keep her mother calm, telling her only that work had become difficult, Leon Hartmann was facing his own war, one fought in clean rooms with sharp smiles, where every word was chosen carefully. And as he sat in another meeting that afternoon, surrounded by lawyers and partners who now questioned his leadership, Leon felt the pressure rising steadily, not as loud threats but as slow doubt planted everywhere, and he understood that this was how powerful people punished those who refused to play along, by making them look unstable, by turning allies silent, and by forcing them to doubt themselves. And yet, Leon held firm, because Nina's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that truth, once known, could not be ignored without destroying something inside. And as the hours passed, Leon's legal team confirmed what Nina had found, discovering more hidden dangers in the contract that proved her warnings were real. And this confirmation strengthened Leon's resolve but also deepened the anger of those who had planned the trap. And by evening, private calls turned colder, investors grew uneasy, and rumors spread faster, painting Leon as difficult, unpredictable, even arrogant. And when Nina saw another headline questioning Leon's judgment, her heart tightened again, because she felt responsible for pulling him into open conflict. And she wondered if a simple waitress had the right to change the fate of powerful men. And yet she knew the answer deep inside, because truth did not belong only to the rich. And as night fell, Nina heard footsteps outside her door again, slower this time, and she froze, listening carefully. But when no knock came, she realized the fear itself was becoming her enemy, stealing her peace, even in silence. And she sat down, holding her phone tightly, unsure if she should call Leon again, not wanting to be a burden, but at the same time craving reassurance. And as if sensing her thoughts, Leon called her, his voice steady but warm, asking how she was holding up. And Nina surprised herself by answering honestly, admitting she was scared, not for herself, but for her mother. And Leon listened quietly, not interrupting, and when she finished, he told her that arrangements had been made, that a lawyer and security contact would reach out to her, not to control her life but to protect it. And Nina wanted to refuse again, to stand on her own, but exhaustion softened her resistance, and she agreed, understanding that independence meant little if she was not alive to protect the people she loved. And later, that, as Nina Fischer pointed at the final clause she had just discovered, her hand trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the weight of what she was about to say. Because this part of the contract went beyond business tricks and hidden losses. It quietly shifted legal responsibility onto Leon Hartmann himself, meaning that if the project failed for reasons outside his control, he alone could be blamed, sued, and stripped of everything he owned. And when Nina explained this in simple words, Leon felt his breath grow shallow, his mind racing through worst-case futures where years of work vanished and his name became a warning whispered in boardrooms. And for a long moment, he said nothing, staring at the papers as if they had betrayed him. And in that silence, Nina wondered if she had gone too far, if helping him would only make things worse for both of them. But then Leon slowly folded the contract, placed it neatly on the table, and looked at her with a calm that scared her more than anger. Because she recognized the look of a man who had just crossed a line and could not go back, and he thanked her, quietly, not with the loud confidence of a billionaire, but with the voice of someone who had been saved from walking into fire. And he asked her one question that surprised her, not about money or strategy, but about trust, asking if she believed there was still a clean way out of this deal without starting a war. And Nina thought carefully before answering, because she knew powerful people rarely accepted no without punishment. And she told him the truth, that there was a way. But it would require courage, patience, and a willingness to look weak for a moment. And Leon listened closely as she suggested he demand a full translation and review in the morning, using legal respect as his shield, even if his partners mocked him or pressured him. Because rushing now would only help those who wanted him blind. And as she spoke, Leon noticed how confidently she explained complex ideas in simple words. And he realized that Nina was not just reacting, she was thinking ahead, protecting him like someone protecting her own future. And just as he was about to ask more, a sharp voice cut through the quiet, his phone vibrating again, this time with a call from an unknown number. And when he answered, the voice on the other end was cold and firm, telling him that delays were unacceptable and reminding him of consequences. And although no direct threat was spoken, both Leon and Nina felt it clearly. And when the call ended, Nina's face paled, because she knew that voice, not personally, but by reputation, the voice of people who always got what they wanted. And she whispered that she might be in danger now, too, because anyone standing between such people and their money became a target. And for the first time, fear for herself rose in her chest, because she thought of her sick mother waiting at home, depending on her small income. And she stood up slowly, saying she should leave before things got worse. But Leon stood as well, stopping her gently, telling her that if she walked away now, she would carry this fear alone, and he refused to let that happen, because whether she wanted it or not, she was already part of this. And his words were not dramatic, just firm and honest. And Nina searched his face, looking for arrogance or false promises, but found only responsibility, and she sat back down, though her heart pounded, knowing she had just chosen a dangerous path. And as the night thinned toward morning, Leon ordered coffee for both of them, ignoring the looks from staff, and they continued planning quietly, deciding what to say, what not to say, how to protect Nina from blame, and how to expose the trap without burning bridges. And during a brief pause, Leon asked Nina why she was really helping him, beyond doing the right thing, and she answered honestly that she had spent her whole life watching powerful people hurt the weak without consequence, and that for once, she wanted to stop it, even if just a little. And her words stayed with Leon, because he realized that for years he had been on the other side of that line, not cruel, but unaware. And as the sky outside turned from black to gray, the restaurant manager appeared, his eyes sharp, noticing Nina sitting with a customer, and he called her name sharply, reminding her of rules and consequences. And Nina stood up, ready to accept whatever came. But Leon stepped forward before she could speak, introducing himself properly for the first time, his voice calm but commanding, and said that Nina was assisting him on an urgent professional matter and that any issues should be taken up with him. And the manager hesitated, clearly intimidated but unhappy, warning Nina that this could still cost her job. And when he walked away, Nina felt both relieved and terrified, because she knew protection like this did not last forever. And as dawn finally broke, light spilling through the windows, Leon realized that the real deadline was no longer just the contract signing, but the safety of the woman who had saved him from ruin. And in that quiet morning light, with empty tables around them and danger waiting outside, Leon Hartmann understood that trust had turned into risk, and risk had quietly begun to turn into something much deeper. As the restaurant slowly emptied, and the sound of chairs being moved echoed softly in the background, Nina Fischer felt the weight of the night pressing down on her shoulders heavier than ever before, because what had started as a simple act of kindness had now turned into something dangerous and impossible to escape. And as she sat back down after Leon Hartmann spoke to the manager, her hands were cold, her heart racing with thoughts of consequences she could not control. Yet, when she looked at Leon, she saw that he was no longer just a rich man in trouble, but someone who understood that his world had collided with hers in a way that could not be undone. And Leon noticed her fear, the way she held her arms close to herself as if trying to stay safe. And for the first time in years, he felt responsible for someone beyond contracts and numbers, because Nina had stepped into this storm for him without asking for anything in return. And that realization settled deep inside him, changing how he viewed the night, the deal, and even himself. And as they sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of the city waking up, Leon spoke softly, asking Nina if she truly understood how dangerous this could become. And Nina nodded slowly, saying she did. But that danger was something she had lived with for years, just in quieter ways, through unpaid wages, sudden job losses, unpaid hospital bills, and nights wondering how to survive the next day. And she explained that rich people faced loud dangers with big numbers, but poor people faced silent dangers every day. And her words struck Leon deeply, because he realized that while he feared losing billions, Nina feared losing the little stability she had fought so hard to keep. And yet, she was still here, still helping him. And as that truth settled between them, Leon made a quiet promise to himself that whatever happened next, he would not allow Nina to suffer for doing the right thing, even if it meant turning powerful enemies against him. And as the clock moved closer to the early morning hours, they returned to the contract once more, reading it line by line, Nina translating each section carefully, explaining not only what it said, but what it meant, how certain words could be used later to twist responsibility, how silence in a contract could be more dangerous than clear threats. And Leon listened closely, learning more in a few hours with Nina than he had learned in years of meetings with expensive advisors. Because she explained everything in simple language, the way someone explains things when they truly want the other person to understand, not just agree. And as they worked, Leon began to see a pattern, realizing that the deal was designed to look generous at first, but slowly tighten around him, giving his partners control while keeping him legally responsible. And anger rose again inside him, but this time it was mixed with clarity, because now he knew the truth, and truth gave him power, even if it came at a cost. And at one point, Nina paused, her eyes fixed on the page, and she admitted that if Leon challenged the deal openly, the people behind it would likely turn against him quickly, using media pressure, legal delays, and public doubt to weaken him, and Leon smiled faintly at that, because he had faced public doubt before, but what worried him now was Nina's safety, because she was not protected by wealth or influence, and he asked her what she would do if her manager fired her in the morning, and Nina shrugged lightly, pretending not to care. But her eyes betrayed her fear, and she admitted that finding another job would not be easy, especially with her mother's condition. And hearing this, Leon felt a tightening in his chest, because he understood that while he could recover from losses, Nina could not afford even one mistake. And as the sky outside grew brighter, painting the windows with pale light, Leon's phone rang again, this time from his assistant, reminding him that cars were ready to take him to the meeting location. And Leon told him calmly that the signing would be delayed, that there would be a full review and translation. And although his assistant tried to protest, Leon ended the call firmly, knowing that this decision would send shockwaves through his partners. And Nina looked at him with surprise, realizing that he had chosen confrontation over comfort, and she asked quietly if he was sure, because once he took this step, there would be no easy return. And Leon answered honestly that he was no longer afraid of losing money, but afraid. When Nina Fischer finished explaining the dangerous parts of the contract, silence fell between her and Leon Hartmann, a heavy silence filled with fear, truth, and the ticking sound of the clock on the wall, because outside the restaurant, the city of Berlin was asleep, unaware that a billionaire's future was hanging by a thread at a small wooden table. And Leon leaned back slowly, running his hand through his hair as if trying to wake himself from a bad dream, because everything Nina said made sense, too much sense. And he realized with cold clarity that this deal was never meant to help him. It was designed to trap him. And the thought that powerful people had planned this so carefully made his chest tight. But what confused him even more was the person sitting across from him. A poor waitress in a simple uniform who saw what his best lawyers had missed. And Leon looked at Nina again, really looked at her this time, noticing the dark circles under her eyes from long shifts, the small scar near her wrist from a past accident, and the way she held herself straight, even though life had clearly bent her many times. And he asked her quietly how she knew so much about legal language. And Nina hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table, because she was not used to speaking about herself, especially to men like him. But something about Leon's broken confidence made her speak honestly, and she told him that, before life became hard, before her father died and her mother fell sick, she had studied languages and basic law at a local college, dreaming of becoming a translator or teacher. But dreams did not pay hospital bills, and so she left her studies and started working wherever she could, learning to read contracts carefully because every job she took tried to cheat her in small ways. Unpaid hours, false promises, hidden rules, and Leon listened without interrupting, feeling something unfamiliar rise inside him. A mix of respect and guilt, because he had always believed intelligence was rewarded. Yet here sat proof that life was not fair, and as Nina spoke, footsteps echoed nearby, making her stop suddenly, her eyes darting toward the kitchen door. And she whispered that her manager did not like staff sitting with customers, especially rich ones, because trouble always followed. And Leon realized then that by helping him, Nina was risking her job, the only thing keeping her and her mother alive. And he felt the weight of that sacrifice press down on him harder than the billion-dollar numbers in his head. And he told her she could leave if she wanted, that he would not blame her. But Nina shook her head slowly, saying that walking away now would haunt her forever, because she knew the truth and could not pretend otherwise. And just as she finished speaking, Leon's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from one of his partners, asking if everything was ready for the morning signing. The words polite but cold, and Nina watched Leon's face tighten as he typed a short reply saying he needed more time. And she warned him softly that asking for delays could make his enemies nervous, because people who plan traps panic when their victim stops moving. And those words sent a chill through Leon, because they confirmed his fear that this was bigger than a simple bad contract. And as the minutes passed, Nina continued reading deeper into the document, finding more hidden risks, each one worse than the last. Clauses that transferred responsibility, clauses that allowed silent changes, clauses that tied his company to debts that were not his. And Leon felt anger rise inside him, not loud anger, but sharp and controlled, the kind that burns quietly. And he realized that someone wanted to destroy him, slowly, legally, and without mercy. And suddenly the restaurant lights dimmed slightly as the night shift changed, music growing softer, chairs being stacked in the distance, and Nina glanced at the clock, realizing it was past midnight, and whispered that she would soon be asked to leave. And Leon knew that if she left, he would be blind again, lost in a language that could ruin him. And so he made a decision he never thought he would make. He asked Nina to stay, not as a waitress, but as his translator for the night, promising to take responsibility if her manager complained. And Nina stared at him, shocked, because she had never been asked something like that, especially not by a man whose watch was probably worth more than her monthly salary. And fear flashed across her face, fear of losing her job, fear of powerful people, fear of stepping into a world that could crush her. But beneath that fear was something stronger, a quiet courage that had carried her through years of hardship, and she nodded slowly, agreeing to help. But only on one condition, that Leon promise not to sign anything until every word was clear, no matter the pressure. And Leon agreed, without hesitation, because for the first time that night, he felt he was not alone. And as they worked together, whispering over papers while the city slept, something changed between them, not love, not trust, yet but a connection born from shared danger. And when Leon offered to order food for her, she refused politely, saying she could not accept special treatment, and that small refusal made Leon smile for the first time that night, because it showed him who Nina truly was, someone who valued dignity over comfort. And just as dawn crept closer, and the sky outside began to lighten slightly, Nina suddenly froze, her finger stopping on a page, her face going pale as she realized something even more dangerous, something that did not just threaten Leon's company, but could place legal blame on him personally. And as she looked up to tell him, footsteps approached again, heavier this time, and a shadow fell over their table, reminding them that the world around them was waking up, and that their secret meeting could be discovered at any moment. And in that fragile moment, Leon Hartmann understood that trusting Nina Fischer was no longer just a business risk. It was a turning point. Because whatever happened next would pull both of them into a storm neither could escape. And as Nina took a deep breath to speak, the night tightened its grip, promising that the real danger was only just beginning. Leon Hartmann had faced storms in boardrooms, lawsuits that could destroy companies, and nights where billions moved with one signature. But nothing prepared him for this night in Berlin, where time felt like an enemy breathing on his neck, because by sunrise a single mistake would cost him everything he had built in 15 years. A global empire hanging by a thread because of one simple truth: Leon could not speak German. And the contract lying on the table in front of him was written entirely in a language that now felt like a locked door, mocking him with every unfamiliar word, every sharp sentence that looked harmless but could hide a knife. And as the quiet restaurant hummed with soft music and distant laughter, Leon sat alone at a corner table, his expensive suit tied around his shoulders, headphone buzzing non-stop with calls from investors, lawyers, and partners who all expected him to save the deal. But his translator, the man he trusted with his life's work, had vanished just hours before the final signing, leaving behind nothing but a cold message saying he could not make it. And Leon knew deep down that this disappearance was no accident, that someone wanted him blind tonight, wanted him desperate, wanted him to sign without understanding, because the deal promised expansion into Europe, factories, jobs, and influence. But one wrong clause could drain his company slowly until nothing remained. And as Leon rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the words he could not read, fear crept into his chest, a fear he had not felt since the days when he was a poor student dreaming of success, when failure meant sleeping, hungry, and now failure meant losing billions, employees, trust, and a legacy he had sworn to protect. And just as he pushed the contract away in frustration, feeling trapped by time and language, a soft voice broke the silence, asking gently if he wanted more water. And Leon looked up to see Nina Fischer, a young waitress with tired eyes but a calm face, standing beside him with a simple tray, her uniform slightly worn, her hair tied back in a neat but rushed way. And at first, Leon barely noticed her, because rich men like him had learned to look through people, not at them, but something about the way she waited, patient and respectful, made him pause. And when he tried to answer in English, his stress slipped into his voice. And Nina noticed immediately, because she had seen many rich men eat here, but none looked so lost, so close to breaking. And when she heard him mutter angrily about papers and time, she hesitated, knowing she could get in trouble for talking too much. But something in her heart pushed her forward, and she asked, in clear but careful English, if he was having trouble with German. And Leon froze, surprised, because her English was good, better than expected. And he nodded without thinking, admitting he could not understand the contract at all. And in that moment, with only hours left before dawn, Leon was a billionaire with no power, and Nina was a poor waitress holding a chance she did not yet understand. And she glanced around nervously, knowing her manager disliked employees getting involved with guests. But when she looked back at Leon and saw the fear behind his calm mask, she quietly pulled a chair and sat across from him, lowering her voice as if the walls could hear, and asked if she could look at the papers. And Leon hesitated, because trusting a stranger with a deal worth billions felt insane, but losing everything felt worse. And so he slid the contract toward her, his hands shaking slightly, and as Nina began to read, Her expression slowly changed, her eyes moving faster, her brow tightening. And Leon watched every movement, every breath, knowing his future was unfolding in silence. And after a few minutes, that felt like hours, Nina stopped, swallowed, and looked up at him with a seriousness that made his heart pound, because she had found something dangerous, something hidden behind polite words and legal language. And she told him slowly that there was a clause buried deep inside. A clause that allowed his partners to take control of his company. If certain conditions were met, conditions so easy to manipulate that it was almost guaranteed. And as she explained in simple words what it meant, Leon felt the ground disappear beneath him, realizing he was seconds away from signing his own destruction, and his mind raced with questions. Who planned this? How deep the trap went? And why his translator vanished knowing, while the restaurant lights flickered softly above them. And the night outside grew colder. Leon leaned back, stunned, realizing that the biggest mistake of his life was not about money, but about assuming. Power protected him from being fooled. And as Nina continued pointing out more issues, risks, and tricks in the contract, Leon saw not a waitress, but a woman with intelligence sharpened by hardship. Someone who had learned to read carefully, because one mistake in life could cost you everything. And when he asked her why she spoke such good English, she told him briefly about studying languages before life pushed her into working long hours to support her sick mother, and her words were simple, without self-pity, but they hit Leon harder than any business speech, because he suddenly saw the difference between them. He had money, but no safety tonight. And she had nothing but honesty. As midnight passed, and the deadline drew closer, Leon realized that trusting Nina Fischer might be the only way to survive the night. Even though powerful people would not like her involvement, and as if fate itself was testing them, his phone rang again. This time with a warning from an unknown number telling him to sign and not ask questions. And Nina saw the message. Her face pale, understanding the danger instantly. Because she knew what happened when poor people stood between rich men and their plans. And yet, she did not stand up or walk away. Instead, she met Leon's eyes and told him quietly that if he signed this contract, he would lose everything within a year. But if he fought back, tonight would change his life forever. And in that moment, sitting in a small Berlin restaurant with a poor waitress in a billion-dollar decision, Leon Hartmann understood that the deadline was not just about money, but about trust, courage, and a choice that would tie his fate to Nina Fischer in ways neither of them could imagine. And as the clock moved closer to dawn, the story of a billionaire and a waitress began not with love, not with promises, but with fear, truth, and a single mistake that almost cost Leon Hartmann everything.